At 58 feet underwater, with almost no visibility, I put my hand on a bridge pier and felt letters carved into the concrete, C-A-L, then my last name, Pruitt, my full name. And directly underneath it was one number, 58, the exact depth I was standing at. Now, that would already be a pretty messed up thing to find on a routine commercial dive, but here's the problem. That concrete was poured in 1931, decades before I was born. And when we later pulled an original construction photograph from September of 1931, the markings were already there, no joke. But that still wasn't the worst thing we found beneath Pier 4. Because a few days later, at the same depth, I found an undocumented opening in the concrete body width, about 6 feet deep, with an old commercial diving helmet and a carefully coiled umbilical sitting inside, like somebody had been there before me. Like somebody had finished a job or made a decision. And once we found out who the last diver on that pier had been, the entire situation went sideways. To explain why I refused to go inside that opening, I need to start with what this job actually was. I want to start with something practical, because practical is how I think, and practical is the only way I know how to tell this accurately. When you inspect a bridge substructure, you are not doing what most people imagine when they hear the word diving. You are not floating in blue water with good visibility and a reef below you and sunlight coming down in columns from the surface. You are working. You are in cold, dark, moving water with limited or zero visibility. One hand on the concrete and one hand on whatever tool the job requires, breathing through a surface supply umbilical that keeps you tethered to the world above and which you are aware of at all times the way a surgeon is aware of their hands. Not consciously, but completely. You move slowly. You document methodically. You do not take risks that are not calculated, because the river does not make exceptions and the concrete does not care about you one way or the other. I've been doing this for 12 years. Before that, I did 4 years of commercial diving school and 2 years working harbor infrastructure in Baltimore, which was its own education in the particular kind of patience that underwater work requires. My name is Cal Pruitt. I am 38 years old. I grew up in Connellsville, Pennsylvania, which is Fayette County, which is exactly the kind of place where a man ends up working bridges for a living, because the bridges are everywhere and the rivers they cross have been part of the landscape so long that people stop seeing them as structures and start seeing them as geography. The Dunmore Bridge is not geography. It is a 1931 reinforced concrete arch bridge carrying County Road 481 over the Youghiogheny River Gorge approximately 11 miles south of Ohiopole. It is 340 feet long. It is 48 feet above the water at midspan. It has 4 piers, 2 approach spans, and a center arch that the engineers who designed it were apparently quite proud of, because the dedication plaque on the north abutment calls it a monument to the ingenuity and labor of Fayette County's working men, and gives the completion date as November 14, 1931. The plaque is bronze, and it has gone green the way bronze does, and the letters are still sharp, which tells you something about how well the thing was built. The bridge is scheduled for replacement. The county has had a replacement in planning for 6 years. Funding came through 18 months ago, and demolition is scheduled to begin the following April. Before demolition can begin, the state DOT requires a full substructure assessment condition of the piers, the footings, the arch soffit, the bearing areas, both to satisfy the environmental record and to inform the demolition contractor about what they are going to be breaking. That assessment was the contract that my company, Allegheny Subsurface, had been awarded the previous spring. It was the largest single contract we had landed in 4 years, which is the kind of thing that matters when you run a 6-person operation out of a warehouse in Carnegie and you have payroll to meet and equipment loans that don't care about the seasonality of bridge work. I drove down to the site on a Sunday afternoon to walk the bridge before the crew arrived Monday morning. I do this on every job. I walk the structure above water first. I look at the deck, the railings, the condition of the abutments, the way the arch sits in the gorge. And I try to form an impression of the bridge as a whole before I go under it and start looking at its parts. It's not a technical process, It's closer to introduction. My father worked steel for 30 years, and he always said you should meet a structure before you start working on it, and I have held on to that without being entirely sure why. The Dunmore Bridge met me well. That is not a technical observation. That is the only honest way I have to describe the impression I got walking out onto the deck that Sunday afternoon in early October with the gorge below me and the river dark green at the bottom, and the wooded walls of the gorge running up on both sides in their full autumn color. The bridge felt held together is the phrase that comes to me. Old concrete bridges often feel like they're in the process of failing, because they are. They show you their cracks and their spalling and their reinforcement corrosion as honestly as a sick person shows you their symptoms, because concrete is in fact honest about its condition in a way that steel is not. But the Dunmore Bridge, standing on its deck that afternoon, felt like it had not yet begun the process of failing. It felt attentive in the way that a well-maintained machine feels attentive, which was unusual for a 92-year-old concrete structure, and which I noted and then filed away as a positive sign for the contract. Better condition than expected meant less anomaly chasing, faster documentation, cleaner deliverables. I stood at mid-span for a while and looked down at the river. The water was moving at a good pace, mid-autumn volume, clear enough at the surface to see the bottom in the shallows near the east bank. At the center of the gorge directly below the bridge, the water went dark. Pier 4 was down there, the central pier, the deepest one, the first one poured in the original construction sequence. I looked at the water above it for a while. There was nothing to see. There never is from the surface. I drove back to the motel in Uniontown and ate a sandwich and called my daughter Marin, who was with her mother that week and who wanted to tell me about a project she was doing at school involving the water cycle, which she explained to me in considerable detail and which I listened to with the specific pleasure of a person whose work puts them in water regularly and who has never once thought about the water cycle consciously, but who found, listening to an 11-year-old explain evaporation with great authority, that it was a more elegant system than he had previously given it credit for. I told her I'd see her in 10 days. She said, okay. She said, be careful. She says that every time, and every time it lands the same way, not as worry exactly, but as a specific weight, the weight of someone who matters, counting on you to make good decisions underwater where they can't reach you. I told her I was always careful. She said she knew. Then she went back to the water cycle and I listened until her mother called her for dinner. Monday morning the crew arrived. Donna Ferraro, my dive tender, pulled in first with the support van, which is a gutted Ford Transit full of surface supply equipment, communication gear, monitoring instruments, and the particular accumulation of rigging hardware and spare parts that any working dive operation develops over years of field improvisation. Donna has been my tender for 6 years, and she runs the surface operation the way she runs everything with the efficiency of someone who has thought about every contingency and the equanimity of someone who has stopped being surprised by which contingency actually materializes. Pete Szabo arrived 20 minutes later in his own truck. Pete is 31, been in commercial diving for 4 years, solid in open water, less comfortable in zero visibility work, which he knows about himself and is honest about, which is the right attitude. Zero visibility diving, working by feel, by the umbilical, by the mental map you build through your fingertips, is a specific skill that some people develop and some people don't, and there is no shame in being someone who doesn't. Pete was on the contract for Piers 1, 2, and 3, which were all accessible in conditions where he'd have at least some visibility. Pier 4 was mine. We rigged the support platform a floating work deck anchored upstream of the bridge and got the equipment staged by 9 in the morning. Marcus Webb, the DOT project engineer, arrived at 10:30 for the kickoff meeting. Webb is 51, has been with the bridge division for 22 years, and carries the particular quality of a person who has spent 2 decades inside a bureaucratic system and made peace with it. He knows the Dunmore Bridge file the way he knows all his bridge files, thoroughly, precisely, and without sentiment. He shook my hand and said the county was glad to have a local firm on the assessment, and I told him we were glad to have the work and we both meant it, which made it a better conversation than most kickoff meetings manage. Webb walked us through the known conditions. The deck had been patched twice, in 1978 and in 2009. The arch soffit had minor spalling in 2 locations, documented in a 2016 visual inspection from a boat. The piers had not been formally assessed since 1989, when a diver had done a visual inspection in conjunction with a scour study. The 1989 report noted the piers as being in good condition with minor biological growth. There was no record of any work having been done on the piers since original construction. I asked Webb what contractor markings we should expect in the concrete. Standard question. Every pour from that era has a different practice for identifying lifts, form panels, inspection points. Some contractors used stamped plates, some used chiseled codes, some used nothing at all. Webb said he'd have to check the construction specifications, but that his recollection was the Dunmore contractor had used a stamped metal tag system for the lift records, tags that would have been set into the wet concrete at intervals and would either still be present or would have corroded out, leaving a small square void. He said if we found anything that didn't look like a tag void or a form mark, to flag it, and he'd cross-reference the construction file. I said we would. I meant it the way I always mean it, as a procedural commitment, not a premonition. I had no premonition, none, 0. I want to be clear about that. Nothing about the kickoff meeting, nothing about the bridge deck walk, nothing about the gorge or the river or the structure felt wrong to me on Monday morning. I was a contractor doing a job I was well qualified to do on a bridge that appeared to be in better condition than its age warranted, and the anomaly that would define the next 2 weeks of my life was 60 feet underwater, and I had no awareness of it whatsoever. We did Pier 1 that afternoon. I ran the surface for Pete's dive, which was a clean operation, 15 feet of water, reasonable visibility, good current conditions. Pete worked the footing perimeter methodically and called up his observations through the comms, and Donna logged them. And I cross-referenced against the drawings Webb had provided. The concrete was sound. There was biological growth, as expected, and one area of minor surface scaling on the downstream face that we photographed and noted. The dive took 40 minutes. The report took 2 hours, standard. Pier 2 on Tuesday. Same process, Pete in the water, me on the surface, Donna on the equipment. 18 feet. Slightly better visibility than Pier 1 because of the angle of the morning light through the gorge. The footing on Pier 2 had a crack on the upstream face. Horizontal, about 8 feet long, approximately 3 millimeters wide, consistent with thermal cycling rather than structural movement. We photographed it, measured it, and logged it. The dive took 55 minutes. Wednesday was a half day. Webb came back with a revised drawing set for Pier 3, which had a known geometry discrepancy between the as-built drawings and a 1972 photographic survey. And we spent the morning reconciling the drawing set before Pete went in that afternoon. Pier 3 was 34 feet, murky from a rain event 2 days prior, and Pete did his best work of the contract there, methodical, unhurried, complete. We got everything we needed in one dive. Thursday was paperwork and equipment maintenance. I serviced the umbilical connections, checked the regulators, and organized the photographic documentation from the first 3 piers into the reporting format Webb's office required. Donna drove into Uniontown for supplies. Pete drove home to Pittsburgh for the night. Friday morning was Pier 4. Up to this point, the job had been almost boringly normal. 3 piers, 3 clean inspections, no drama. Then Pier 4 changed the entire contract, and the first thing I found down there wasn't hidden equipment, a structural failure, or a body. It was something much more specific, something that should not have known I existed. I want to describe the first dive on Pier 4 in the order that it happened, because the order matters. The entry point was from the work platform, which we had re-anchored upstream of the central span, Thursday afternoon, so that the umbilical would run clean in the current without wrapping around the pier. The current at Pier 4 was stronger than at the other 3. The gorge narrows slightly at the center, which accelerates the flow, and you feel it the moment you hit the water as a persistent lateral push that you have to account for in your movement. I went in at 8:40 in the morning. The water temperature at the surface was 52 degrees Fahrenheit. I expected it to be colder at depth. I was in a dry suit with a full-face mask and the surface supply umbilical, which carries my breathing gas, my communications line, and my video feed back to the surface monitor where Donna could watch what the helmet camera was seeing. The descent to 60 feet takes about 3 minutes at a controlled rate. The light goes fast in the Yugiyogani at that time of year. By 20 feet, I was in what I would call usable visibility, maybe 4 feet of clear water ahead of me. By 35 feet, it was down to 2 feet. By 50 feet, I was working by feel. And by the video light on the helmet, which illuminated a small cone of visibility directly in front of my face mask and not much else. I reached the footing at 58 feet. The footing of Pier 4 is substantial, 22 feet wide on the upstream face, which is the face I contacted first. The concrete is the original 1931 pour, and you can feel the difference between Depression-era concrete and modern concrete with your hands. The aggregate is coarser, the surface texture is rougher, the form marks are deeper and more irregular. The biological crust on the upper portion of the pier shaft stops at the footing line, and below that, the concrete is clean in the way of surfaces that don't get light pale gray, slightly chalky to the touch, with the occasional void where a form tie rod was removed. I worked the upstream face first. Standard practice upstream face takes the most hydraulic load and is the most likely location for scour damage or crack propagation. I moved laterally from the center line toward the east edge of the footing, running my hand along the surface, feeling for cracks, voids, delamination, anything that wasn't smooth concrete. The helmet camera recorded everything my hand passed over. The upstream face was clean. Better than clean, it was in remarkable condition for a 92-year-old footing. No significant cracking, no voids beyond the expected tie rod holes. Biological growth only in the upper foot or so where some light penetrated. I made my notes through the comms and Donna logged them topside. I moved to the downstream face by going around the east end of the footing, a slow, deliberate transit with my hand on the concrete the whole way. The current pushing at my left side, the umbilical trailing behind me and up to the surface. The downstream face was the same story. Sound concrete, minor surface weathering, no structural anomalies in the first pass. I moved to the base of the pier shaft, the junction between the shaft and the footing, which is a common location for stress concentration and crack development. I worked my way along the base from east to west, my hand in the right-angled joint between vertical shaft and horizontal footing, feeling the geometry, checking for separation. I was approximately 2/3 of the way along the western portion of the base when my hand found something that was not a form mark and was not a tie rod void and was not a crack. It was cut into the concrete. Deliberately cut with a sharp tool, a chisel, I thought at the time, or something similar. The cuts were clean and deep, maybe a 1/4 inch, with the slightly rough edges that hand chiseling leaves rather than the clean walls of a mechanical cutting tool. I moved my hand over the marks slowly and read them the way you read things by touch when there is no light to read them by. The first character was a C. The second was an A. The third was an L. Then a period. Then a P-R-U-E-T-T Cal Pruitt. My name. My full name. Cut into the base of Pier 4's downstream shaft at 58 feet of depth in concrete that was poured in September of 1931. I held my hand on the letters for I don't know how long. Long enough for Donna to notice I had stopped moving because her voice came through the comms, calm and practical as always. "Cal, you go static on me?" "I'm here," I said. "Found something. Give me a minute." "Copy, you've got plenty of gas. Take your time." I moved the video light closer to the concrete and looked through the face mask at what my hand had been reading. The letters were visible in the light, shallow but definite, running left to right in a horizontal line about 18 inches long. The letter forms were irregular, hand-cut, the kind of lettering a person makes when they are working without a guide. The C was slightly larger than the other letters. The 2 T's at the end were close together. Below the name, separated by about 2 inches of unmarked concrete, was a number, 58. I looked at that number for a long time, 58, the depth I was at, the depth of Pier 4's base. the depth at which I had found the name. Then I said to no one in particular and through a comms line that Donna was monitoring, "Donna, I need you to make sure Pete is not within earshot of the comms." There was a pause. "He's in the van. Why?" "Because I need to ask you something and I need to know he didn't set it up." Another pause. "Cal, what did you find?" "My name," I said, "cut in the concrete with a number under it." The silence on the comms lasted about 4 seconds, which is a long time for Donna. "Say that again." "My name, Cal Pruitt, cut into the base of the pier shaft, and the number 58. 58 like the depth?" 58 like the depth. Donna was quiet for another moment. Then she said, in the tone she uses when she's being very careful, "Did Pete go in the water at any point this week when you weren't watching him?" "No." "Did anyone else have access to the work platform overnight?" "Not without a boat." "And it's definitely your name." "It's definitely my name." There was a longer pause. When Donna spoke again, her voice had the particular flatness she uses when she has encountered something she cannot immediately categorize and has decided not to pretend otherwise. "Okay," she said, "finish your survey. We'll talk when you're up." I finished the survey. I am telling you that not as evidence of exceptional composure, but as evidence of how completely my professional framework operates as a default. I had found my own name cut into 90-year-old concrete at the bottom of a river. My nervous system registered this as significant. My training registered it as something to be investigated after the contracted work was complete. The job won because it always does. That's what 12 years of working underwater does to a person. It builds a hierarchy of immediate priorities that is very hard to override. The rest of the Pier 4 base was in the same remarkable condition as the other faces. I documented it thoroughly. I found 3 tie rod voids, 1 area of minor surface scaling on the north face of the footing, and no structural anomalies of significance. I did not find any other markings. I surfaced at 11:20. Donna was at the platform edge to take my weight belt and help me out of the water. She didn't say anything until I had the helmet off and was sitting on the equipment chest with a cup of coffee from the thermos. Then she said, "Pete is still in the van." I told him the comms were glitching and I needed quiet for calibration. I said, "Pete didn't do this." "I know," she said, "but I wanted him out of earshot while you tell me exactly what you found." I told her exactly what I found. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "Okay, possibilities." This is a thing Donna does that I value more than almost anything else about working with her. When something doesn't fit, she doesn't panic, and she doesn't dismiss. She says possibilities, and then she lists them. "1," she said. "Pete carved it before the contract started, some kind of elaborate joke, which requires him to have dived Pier 4 alone at night without telling you, in 58 feet of moving water, carrying a chisel and a light, specifically to carve your name in the concrete at the exact depth of the footing. Which is either one hell of a committed practical joke, or it didn't happen." "It didn't happen," I said. "Agreed." 2. Someone else carved it before the contract started. A previous inspection team, a local diver, someone with access to the bridge and knowledge of who was going to be doing this assessment, which requires advanced knowledge of the contract award and the assignment of the lead diver, plus the same solo nighttime dive scenario. "Webb said the last underwater inspection was 1989, I said, "and I'm pretty sure my name wasn't a known quantity in 1989. I was 15. "Agreed." 3. It's a coincidence. Another Cal Pruitt, or Cal, is an abbreviation for something, or Pruitt is a contractor's mark and Cal is a separate notation. I thought about the letter forms I had read with my hand and seen with the video light. The C slightly larger than the rest, the 2 T's close together, the period after the L that separated the first name from the last. "It's my name," I said, "written the way I write it." Donna looked at me steadily. "Okay," she said. 4. The concrete is from 1931, and the name was put there in 1931, which means either someone in 1931 knew your name, which is impossible, or the name is something else that your brain is reading as your name, which is a thing that happens in zero-visibility tactile inspection. The video light, I said. Right, you saw it. I saw it. CAL.PRUETT, 18 inches of horizontal lettering, hand-cut, my name. Donna picked up her coffee. She looked at the bridge above us. She looked at it for a long time. Okay, she said finally. I want to go back down with you tomorrow and see it myself. I said that was what I wanted too. If the name had disappeared on the second dive, I could have blamed stress, bad visibility, or my own brain. That would have been the easy way out. It didn't disappear, and Donna was about to see exactly what I had seen. Saturday morning came in cold and clear, the kind of October morning in the gorge where the light hits the tops of the wooded walls first and works its way down slowly, and the river stays in shadow until almost 9. I was at the platform by 7:30. Donna was already there, which is normal. Donna is always there before me, which is a thing I have stopped trying to change. Pete arrived at 8. I told him we were going back to Pier 4 for a second pass on the downstream face, that I had found what might be a contractor marking I wanted to document more carefully. Pete accepted this without question. He is not a suspicious person by nature, and contractor markings are a legitimate reason for a second dive, and I gave him the surface monitoring assignment, which he was happy to have because it meant he wasn't going in the water at 58 feet in a current. I suited up. Donna ran the equipment check herself rather than splitting it with Pete, which she did without explanation, and which Pete also accepted without question, because Donna running her own checks is also normal. Before I put the helmet on, Donna leaned close and said quietly, "If I can see it on the monitor feed, I want you to hold the light on it for a full minute. Don't move the camera, just hold it." I said I would. "And Cal," she said, "if it's not there this time, we don't talk about it again. We finish the contract and we go home." I understood what she was offering. A clean exit from something that didn't make sense, available if the evidence cooperated. I appreciated it. I also knew it wasn't going to be available because the letters I had read with my hand and seen with my light the previous morning were not a hallucination and were not a misreading, and they were going to be there when I went back. They were there. I found the position on the downstream shaft base in about 4 minutes. I had noted the distance from the east corner of the footing on the first dive, a habit I have that pays off in exactly this kind of situation. I brought the video light to within 8 inches of the concrete and held it steady, and I heard Donna's voice come through the comms. "I see it," she said. She said it the way she says things she would prefer not to be saying, flat, specific, without inflection. Not frightened. Something quieter than frightened, which is the sound of a competent person encountering a fact that their competence cannot organize. "CAL," she said, period, PRUETT, and the number. 58, I said. 58, she confirmed. I held the light on it for the full minute she had asked for. Then I moved the camera to capture the surrounding concrete. I wanted to document the context, the form marks, the tie rod voids, the texture of the original pore surface, so that anyone looking at the footage later would have a reference for the age and character of the concrete around the name. The surrounding concrete was original, undisturbed. There was no evidence of the surface having been reworked or patched around the letters. The letters were in the original pour. I surfaced. Pete was on the platform. I handed him my weight belt and he helped me out of the water, and he looked at my face and said, "You okay? You look like you found something worse than a contractor mark." I said the marking was more extensive than I'd expected, and I needed to talk to Webb about the construction records. Pete nodded. He is observant enough to know when a conversation is finished. I called Webb from Donna's phone while I was still in the dry suit, sitting on the equipment chest with the gorge walls around me and the river moving steadily below the platform. Webb answered on the second ring. I told him I had found a marking on the Pier 4 shaft base that didn't match the tag void system he had described at the kickoff meeting, and that I wanted to cross-reference it against the construction records. I kept my voice even. I kept the description general. I said it appeared to be chiseled lettering, and I wanted to know if the contractor had used any kind of identifying code system beyond the metal tags. Webb said he would pull the construction file and bring it to the site Monday morning. He said these old bridges sometimes had all kinds of notations in the concrete inspection dates, foreman initials, pour sequence codes, and that the original specifications didn't always document informal marking practices. He sounded reassuring in the professional way of someone who has seen a lot of old bridges and has learned that their surprises are usually explicable. I told him I appreciated it. I hung up. Donna was standing at the platform railing, looking at the water above Pier 4. Her back was to me. She didn't turn around when she spoke. "The footage from yesterday," she said. "Did you run it back?" I had not. The previous afternoon I had downloaded the dive footage to the project laptop per the documentation protocol, but I had not reviewed it. I had eaten dinner alone at the motel and sat on the bed for a while and thought about the name in the concrete, and specifically about the number under the name, the 58, and what it was telling me if it was telling me anything. And then I'd called Marin's mother's house on the chance that Marin was still up, but it was too late and she was already in bed. And I had sat with the phone in my hand for a while, and then I had gone to sleep. "Run it back to the first pass," Donna said. "The part where your hand is moving along the shaft base before you find the name. I want to see what the concrete looks like right before the letters start." I pulled up the footage on the project laptop, which was in a weatherproof case on the equipment chest. I scrubbed back to the first dive, to the section of footage where my hand was moving along the base of the downstream shaft. The video quality at that depth with the helmet light was what it always is. The illuminated cone of visibility directly ahead, the concrete surface in sharp relief in the light, the surrounding water dark and uniform. I watched my hand move along the concrete. I watched the surface texture of the 1931 pour pass under my fingers, the coarse aggregate, the form marks, the slight irregularity of 90-year-old hand-finished concrete. Then I watched my hand stop. Then I watched my hand move back, slowly, to the place where it had stopped. And in the footage, in the video light, before my fingers had identified the first letter by touch, before I had said anything through the comms visible in the concrete, clear and sharp in the helmet camera image were the letters. Cal, Pruitt, and below them, the number. Donna had come to stand beside me. She was looking at the screen. "I wanted to make sure it wasn't the tactile reading influencing what you saw," she said. "I wanted to make sure the camera saw it before your hand identified it." "It did," I said. "It did," she agreed. We sat with that for a moment. The river moved under the platform. Somewhere up on the gorge wall, a crow called once and then was quiet. "Okay," Donna said. "Webb on Monday." "Webb on Monday?" I said. By Saturday afternoon, we had eliminated the explanations I actually wanted. It wasn't Pete. It wasn't a tactile hallucination. It wasn't something the camera invented after I recognized the letters. The name was physically there, so the next question was simple and brutal. How long had it been there? The weekend passed. I drove back to Pittsburgh Saturday evening and spent Sunday doing the things I do when I am trying to not think about something. I serviced equipment. I caught up on paperwork for the previous contract. I drove to a hardware store and bought nothing in particular but walked the aisles for an hour, which is a habit I developed in childhood and which has the effect of organizing my thinking through my hands in the way that being in familiar physical spaces does for some people. I thought about the name. I thought about it from every angle my materialist framework could reach. I went back to Donna's list of possibilities and I tried to extend it to find a fifth option she hadn't thought of. I could not find one. The name was in the original concrete. No one had put it there after the fact. No one in 1931 knew my name. Those two facts sat beside each other without resolution, and I found that what I felt about them, sitting in my kitchen Sunday night with a beer I wasn't drinking, was not exactly fear. It was the specific unease of a person who has built their entire professional life on the premise that physical facts are explicable, encountering a physical fact that is not. It felt like a kind of vertigo, not the spinning kind, the kind where the floor is still level, but you have lost confidence that level means what you thought it meant. I thought about the number, 58. I thought about it as a year, 1958, and tried to construct a scenario in which a name was added to the concrete in 1958, which was 27 years after the original pour, which would require significant surface preparation and would leave visible evidence of reworking that I had not found. I discarded 1958. I thought about it as a code, a contractor's code, a foreman's number, a pour sequence identifier. But the name was clearly a name, and the number was clearly subordinate to it, placed below it, in smaller cuts, in a position that read as descriptive rather than independent. The number was about the name. The number was telling something about the name. I thought about it as a depth, 58 feet, the depth of the footing, the depth at which I had found it. And then I thought, the depth at which I would find it, the depth at which whoever put it there knew I would find it, which required whoever put it there to know not only my name, but the depth at which my work would bring me, which was a thought I was not able to hold for very long before I put it down and went to bed. Monday was supposed to give us a boring answer, a forgotten contractor code, an old inspection mark, some obscure notation buried in a 90-year-old file. Honestly, I would have taken any of those. Instead, Webb brought one photograph that made every normal explanation harder. Marcus Webb arrived at the site Monday morning at 9:30 with a cardboard document tube under one arm and a manila folder under the other. He sat up at the small folding table we kept on the platform for paperwork and spread out the contents of the tube, which were reproductions of the original 1931 construction drawings for the Dunmore Bridge, not the as-built drawings that had been in the DOT file, but the originals, pulled from the State Archive on loan for the contract period. I looked at the Pier 4 drawings carefully. The footing dimensions matched what I had measured. The shaft dimensions matched. The reinforcement layout was consistent with what I had documented. There were no markings indicated on the drawings for the pier shaft base. No contractor codes, no inspection reference points, nothing that would explain deliberate chiseled lettering on the downstream face. Webb pulled several pages from the manila folder. Construction specifications, he said. The marking requirements for the original contractor. He ran his finger down the relevant section and read aloud. Metal identification tags, one per lift, set into the wet concrete on the upstream face of each pier at the top of each lift. No other marking system authorized or required. I asked if there were any records of subsequent inspections that might have involved marking the concrete. Webb checked his folder. The 1989 inspection, he said, was a visual survey from a boat and a brief diver reconnaissance, no contact work, no tools in the water, no marking authorized. Before 1989, there was a 1962 inspection that was also visual only. There was no record of any authorized marking of the Pier 4 concrete at any point after the original pour. I said I wanted to show him something. I had the footage on the project laptop. I had prepared a short clip, 30 seconds of the downstream shaft base, starting with a section of unmarked concrete to establish context, then moving to the name and holding on it for the full minute Donna had asked for. I turned the screen toward Webb and played the clip. Webb watched it. He watched the unmarked concrete. He watched my hand find the position. He watched the letters come into the light. His face did the thing that faces do when they are processing something that doesn't fit a slight tightening around the eyes, a stillness that is different from relaxed attention. "That's your name," he said. "That's my name," I said. "Cal Pruitt." "Cal Pruitt." He looked at the screen for another moment. Then he said, "And that number under it." 58, I said. "The depth." Webb sat back in his chair. He was quiet for a moment. Then he opened the manila folder again and went through it with a different kind of attention, not looking for something he knew was there, but looking for something he hadn't thought to look for before. He went through the specifications. He went through the inspection records. He went through 2 pages of correspondence between the county engineer and the contractor from 1931 that were in the folder as background reference. He didn't find anything. Then he said, "I have the construction photographs." He said it the way a person says something they have just remembered, not as an announcement, but as a thought arriving. He went back to the document tube and produced a small archival envelope, the kind with the acid-free paper and the metal clasp. Inside were 12 photographs, black and white, printed on the heavy paper stock of the early 1930s and reproduced apparently from the original negatives because the detail was good. He laid them on the table in order. They were dated in pencil on the back, a construction sequence running from September through November of 1931. The first photographs showed the formwork being erected in the river timber forms, timber falsework, workers in the water in what looked like minimal protective equipment by modern standards. Subsequent photographs showed the pour in progress, the concrete being placed by crane and bucket, workers with vibrators and hand tools consolidating the mix. The fourth photograph was dated September 19, 1931. Its caption in pencil on the reverse read, "Pier 4. Shaft downstream face form strip, first inspection." The photograph showed the downstream face of the pier 4 shaft shortly after the forms had been stripped. The concrete was clearly wet. There was surface sheen visible even in the black and white photograph, the kind of sheen that new concrete has before it cures. A worker stood to the left of the frame, facing away from the camera, holding what appeared to be a measuring rod. To the right of the worker, at approximately the height of the footing, junction the exact location where I had found the letters, the surface of the concrete was visible in good detail. Webb saw it at the same time I did. Neither of us said anything for a moment. In the photograph, in the wet concrete, at the base of the downstream face of Pier 4, were marks. Horizontal, deliberate, in a line approximately 18 inches long. The photograph was not high enough resolution to read them as individual letters. But the pattern of the marks, the distribution, the spacing, the weight of the cuts was consistent with what I had read with my hand and seen with my video light at 58 feet. And there was no worker near them. The worker with the measuring rod was 6 feet away, facing left. There was no tool in the concrete. There was no hand at the surface. The marks were simply there, in the wet concrete, in a photograph taken the day the forms came off, in September of 1931, 92 years before I had ever heard of the Dunmore Bridge. Webb looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he looked at me. His expression was not fear, exactly. It was the expression of a man who has spent 22 years inside a system built on the premise that bridges are explicable, and who has just encountered a data point that his system cannot accommodate. "I need to make a copy of this photograph for the project file," he said finally. His voice was careful, professional, the voice of someone using procedure as a handhold. "I'd like a copy too," I said. He nodded. He put the photograph back in the archival envelope. He put the envelope in his briefcase. He said he would scan it and send it to me that evening. He said if I found anything else unusual in the Pier 4 assessment, I should flag it immediately. He said the DOT's primary interest was in the structural condition of the bridge, and that anomalous markings, whatever their origin, were a secondary documentation matter. He said all of this in the tone of a man building a structure out of words, the way you build a structure out of timber, not because the timber is beautiful, but because you need something to stand on. I thanked him. He shook my hand. He drove away. Donna, who had been at the equipment station during the meeting, came and stood beside me and looked at the place where Webb's car had been. "He saw it," she said. "He saw it." "What did he say after?" "He said it was a secondary documentation matter." Donna was quiet for a moment. "That's one way to put it," she said. Webb sent the scan that evening. I opened the email in the motel room and looked at it on my laptop screen for a long time. The wet concrete, the absent worker, the marks at the footing base that my eye wanted to resolve into letters, and that the resolution of the photograph would not quite allow. I printed it at the motel's business center. I put the print in the inside pocket of my jacket. I sat on the bed and thought about the number 58 for a long time. Here is what I had established as of Monday evening by the standards of evidence I apply to my professional work. My name was in the concrete at the base of Pier 4's downstream shaft. It had been there since September of 1931. No human hand had put it there. After the pour, the surrounding concrete was original and undisturbed. No human hand had put it there. During the pour, the construction photograph showed no worker or tool near the location. The marks were in the original pour. They had been in the original pour for 92 years, and below my name was a number, 58, which was the depth, which was where I was going. I thought about the word going. I thought about whether it was the right word. I was contracted to complete the Pier 4 assessment. The footing survey was done. What remained was the shaft inspection above the footing, the shaft face from the footing to the waterline, which I could complete without returning to 58 feet. The footing survey was on the record. I had the documentation. I could complete the contract without going back to 58 feet. I thought about that for a while. I thought about it as a professional option, and I thought about it as something else, something harder to name, the specific pull of a place that has indicated it is waiting for you. The particular difficulty of not going toward a thing that has gone to the trouble of learning your name. I thought about Marin explaining the water cycle. I thought about the weight of the word careful and what she meant by it and what I meant when I told her I always was. I thought about the number, 58, not a year, not a code, a depth, a destination. The number was not a warning. It was a coordinate. I closed the laptop. I turned off the light. I lay on the motel bed in the dark and listened to the highway outside and thought about a bridge that had been built in 1931 by men in minimal protective equipment standing in a cold river, and about what a person would have had to know in September of 1931 to cut a name into wet concrete that would not be found for 92 years, and about what they would have had to know to put the right name there. Needless to say, I did not sleep well. Tuesday was a shaft inspection day. I worked the Pier 4 shaft from the waterline down to the footing, which meant a series of shorter dives at incrementally increasing depths, not the full 60 feet, but working the upper and middle sections of the shaft systematically, standard work. I kept my hand on the concrete and my mind on the job, and I documented what I found, which was a shaft in extraordinary condition for its age. Minor spalling in 2 locations above the waterline, consistent with freeze-thaw cycling. Minor biological growth in the upper 10 feet. Below that, clean original concrete, sound and solid, and showing none of the deterioration I would have expected in a structure this old in a river environment. I noted the condition in my log with the same language I use for every assessment. Concrete surface in good condition, no evidence of significant cracking or delamination, original pour intact. What I did not note was what the condition felt like when your hand was moving over it in the dark, the specific solidity of it, the way it did not give at all, the way it felt less like an aging structure and more like something that had not yet begun to age. I did not note that because there is no category in a bridge assessment report for a structure that feels preserved rather than merely intact. Pete spent Tuesday on the arch soffit documentation hanging in a bosun's chair under the deck with a camera and a crack comparator, photographing the 2 spalling locations Webb had flagged in the 2016 visual inspection report. He called up to Donna every 20 minutes with his findings. The spalling was stable, he said. No propagation since 2016. The arch was in good shape. We ate lunch on the platform. The gorge was quiet in the middle of the day. The highway above us had light traffic, mostly local farm trucks and the occasional log hauler, and the sound of it came down the cliff walls as a murmur rather than a noise. The river moved steadily under us. I ate my sandwich and looked at the water above Pier 4 and thought about what was below it. Pete said, "This bridge is in better shape than anything we've looked at in 2 years." "It is," I said. "Kind of a shame they're tearing it down." I looked at the arch above us. The concrete was the color of old bone in the October light. The dedication plaque on the north abutment was not visible from this angle, but I knew it was there. The words about ingenuity and labor and working men pressed into bronze that had gone green. "They're replacing it," I said. "It's not the same as tearing it down." Pete looked at me. "What's the difference?" I thought about it. Tearing something down means it's done. Replacing it means the road keeps going. The function keeps going. The bridge is just the mechanism. Pete thought about that. "Seems like a cold way to look at it." "It's an accurate way," I said. He shrugged and finished his sandwich. Donna refilled her coffee from the thermos and said nothing, which is something Donna does when she is thinking. I watched the water above Pier 4 and thought about mechanisms and about what a bridge is if it is not just a mechanism. This should have been the point where I walked away. I already had the footage. I already had the 1931 photograph. I did not need to return to the exact depth written beneath my name. But curiosity is sneaky like that. Once something impossible becomes physical, part of your brain starts treating the next answer like something you're owed. I wasn't owed anything. I went back anyway. Wednesday morning, I told Donna I was going back to 58 feet. We were alone on the platform. Pete had called in from Pittsburgh to say his truck wouldn't start and he'd be 2 hours late. Donna had the equipment laid out and was running the pre-dive checks. She stopped what she was doing when I said it and looked at me. "For what purpose?" she said. "The footing survey was incomplete," I said. "I need to document the west face." She looked at me for a moment longer. "You documented the west face on the first dive." "I documented the upper west face. The base of the west face at the footing junction, I didn't complete." This was technically true. On the first dive, I had worked the downstream and east and upstream faces thoroughly, and the west face partially. The base of the west face, at the footing shaft junction, was in the record as partially surveyed. Completing it was a legitimate reason for a third dive at that depth. Donna knew this. She also knew that completing the west face was not the reason I was going back. She picked up the regulator she had been checking and resumed her inspection of the connection fittings. She did not look at me when she spoke. "Cal, you understand that whatever that number means, you do not have to go where it points." "I know," I said. "You understand that a thing being there does not obligate you to respond to it." "I know." "You understand that I am going to be on the surface, and that if something goes wrong at 60 feet in a current, I have a limited window to do anything useful." "I know that too," I said. "I've known it for 12 years." She set the regulator down. She looked at the water. She looked at it the way she had looked at it Saturday, from the platform railing, her back to me. "I'm not going to tell you not to go," she said. "You're going to go regardless, and I'd rather you go with me running the surface than without." "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me. Just stay on the umbilical and don't do anything stupid." I suited up. The water temperature had dropped 2 degrees since Monday, 50 degrees at the surface, which meant colder at depth. The current was running slightly faster than it had on the first dive, a minor increase probably related to rainfall upstream. I noted both in the pre-dive log. I noted the time, 8:52 in the morning. I went in. The descent was the same as the first dive, light fading fast, the transition from usable visibility to field work happening around 35 feet, the current a steady lateral push that I corrected for automatically. I reached the footing at 58 feet and took my position at the east corner, then worked my way west along the base, genuinely completing the west face survey, genuinely documenting the footing shaft junction on that face, because my professional framework does not allow me to use a legitimate task as pure cover without actually performing the task. The west face base was consistent with the rest of the footing. Sound concrete, original pour, no significant anomalies. I reached the southwest corner of the footing and turned south, which put me on the downstream face, which put me moving toward the location of the name. I moved past the name without stopping. No way was I lingering there. I had already documented it. I had the footage and the photographs and Webb's archival photograph. I moved past it and continued east along the downstream base, and then I reached the southeast corner, which was where the downstream face met the east face. In the corner at the base of the shaft, There was something that had not been visible on my first pass because, on my first pass, I had been moving west to east and had turned north at this corner rather than continuing to examine it. It was a void, and this is where the story changed. Because the name was impossible, but a name couldn't physically take me anywhere. This could. Not a tie rod void, those are circular, 3 to 4 inches in diameter, left by the removal of form tie hardware after stripping. This was larger, much larger. I found it with my hand first, the way you find everything down there, moving my palm along the concrete and encountering the absence of concrete where concrete should be. I stopped. I moved my hand around the perimeter of the void slowly, mapping it the way a blind person maps a face. It was roughly rectangular, about 20 inches wide and 16 inches tall. The edges were smooth, not the rough edges of a blowout or a delamination void, but the smooth, slightly radiused edges of a formed void, a void that had been shaped during the pour by a deliberate inclusion in the formwork. The depth of it was, I moved my hand inward slowly, and the void went back, past the reach of my hand at full extension. I moved closer to the concrete and reached deeper. The void was deeper than my arm was long. I pulled my hand back. I held my position and thought about this. A formed void in the base of a pier shaft is not structurally impossible. Voids were sometimes created in original pours to allow for inspection access, drainage, or the later installation of instrumentation. They appear in blueprints. They are documented. Webb had given me the complete Pier 4 drawings and the Pier 4 specifications, and neither had shown a void at the base of the downstream shaft face. This void was not in any blueprint. This void had been built into the original pour without authorization, without documentation, and without appearing in 92 years of inspection records. It had been shaped to be smooth-walled and rectangular and deeper than my arm could reach. I moved the helmet camera toward it and switched on the video light at full intensity. The void came into view on the camera and therefore on the surface monitor where Donna was watching as a rectangular darkness set into the pale concrete of the original pour. The edges were as smooth as I had felt them. The void was approximately body width. My body width, specifically in the dry suit and the rigging. I noted this with the specific, reluctant precision of someone who has learned not to dismiss observations that are inconvenient. I moved the light into the void. The void went back approximately 6 feet. The walls were smooth concrete, the same pale gray as the exterior surface. The floor of it was not concrete. The floor of the void, at its far end, held equipment, a dive helmet. The older style, a band mask with an integrated regulator, the kind used by commercial divers in the late 1980s and through the 1990s. The kind I had trained on before the equipment was phased out in favor of full-face masks. It was sitting upright, positioned the way you set a helmet down when you are done with it, with a deliberateness that was not consistent with equipment that had been lost or dropped or carried in by current. Behind the helmet, coiled with the same deliberateness, was an umbilical. The surface supply hose, the communications line, the video cable bundled together and coiled in the specific way that divers coil umbilicals when they are stowing them at the end of a job. Not abandoned, stowed. I held the light on the equipment and did not move for a long time. Donna's voice came through my comms. She'd been silent since my descent. She monitors during my dives and speaks when necessary and has learned over 6 years to read the difference between a silence that means everything is fine and a silence that means something is happening. This silence had apparently read correctly. "Cal," she said, "I'm seeing what the camera is seeing." "I know," I said. "That's a dive helmet." "It is. It's not new." "No," I said. "It's not new." The helmet was not new. It was the older style, as I said. But beyond the style, it showed the specific wear of equipment that had been used regularly over years, the surface scratches on the viewport frame, the discoloration of the rubber seal, the particular patina that dive equipment develops through repeated immersion and drying. It was not a helmet that had been placed in a void in 1931. It was a helmet from 30 years ago. give or take late 1980s, early 1990s, based on the model and the condition. Someone had come to Pier 4 before me. Someone had descended to 58 feet, found the void, and gone into it with their equipment, and someone had not come back. Or, and this was the thought that arrived second, and that I found harder to hold than the first, someone had come to Pier 4, descended to 58 feet, found the void, and stowed their equipment inside it with the deliberateness of a person who has made a decision about what comes next. Not an accident, not an equipment failure, a choice. I pulled the light back from the void. I did not enter it, not a chance. My hand was on the concrete beside the void opening, and I was aware of my hand there, the way I am aware of my hands at all times underwater completely, as a surgeon is aware. And I made a decision with my hand before I made it consciously, which was that the hand was not going into the void. "Donna," I said. "Right here," she said immediately. "I'm coming up." "I'm ready for you," she said. And then, after a brief pause, "Cal, take your time. Don't rush the ascent." It was a practical instruction. It was also the most specific kindness she had offered me in 6 years of working together, which told me something about what she had seen on the monitor. I came up slowly. I did the decompression stop at 15 feet that the dive table required for my bottom time and depth. I held position in the current for 4 minutes and looked at the underside of the Dunmore Bridge from 15 feet below the surface, the arched soffit above me. The stone gray concrete in the greenish light, the bolts and seams and the geometry of a thing built by men in a cold river in 1931. And I thought about what the hollow at the base of the pier had been shaped to receive. One person. The width of one person in a dry suit with full rigging. 6 feet deep, smooth-walled, built into the original pour in September of 1931, which was before my father was born, which was before the concept of me existed in any form, which was before any chain of cause and effect that I could construct would explain how anyone could have known to build it. I surfaced. Donna was at the edge of the platform. She helped me out of the water and took my weight belt and did not say anything while I got the helmet off and sat down on the equipment chest. Then she said, "Tell me what you want to do. Not what did you find, not what was that. What do you want to do?" Which was the right question, and which told me she had understood what she had seen on the monitor. I looked at the water above Pier 4. The river moved over it the same way it had moved over it for 92 years and for all the years before that. Indifferent, continuous. The gorge walls rose above us in their October color, the sandstone exposed in bands on the cliff faces, the trees at the top small against the sky. "I want to know whose equipment that is," I said. "Okay," said Donna. "And I want to know if there's a record of anyone diving this pier between 1989 and now." "Webb would have that." "Webb would have the authorized records. If someone dived it without authorization, Webb wouldn't know." Donna thought about this. "The 1989 inspection report. Who conducted it?" "It'll be in the file," I said. "Webb has the file." "So we ask Webb about the 1989 diver." "We ask Webb about the 1989 diver," I said, "and we ask him if there's any record of unauthorized access to the bridge structure between 1989 and now." I picked up Donna's phone and called Webb. He answered on the third ring. I told him I had found a formed void in the downstream shaft base of Pier 4 that was not indicated on the drawings and that I needed the complete inspection history for the pier, including the name of the diver who had conducted the 1989 assessment. Webb said he would check. He called back 20 minutes later. 20 minutes later, we got a name. And suddenly the old diving gear inside that opening stopped looking random. The 1989 inspection, he said, had been conducted by a firm called River State Diving out of Connellsville. The lead diver on the Pier 4 assessment had been a man named Gary Solon. Webb had the original inspection report in the file, signed by Solon and dated August 14, 1989. Webb said River State Diving had gone out of business in 1993. He said he didn't know what had happened to Gary Solon. I asked if there was any record of unauthorized access to the Dunmore Bridge structure after 1989. Webb was quiet for a moment. Then he said there was a notation in the bridge maintenance file from 1992. A county road crew doing deck work had reported finding dive equipment staged on the bank below the bridge on the upstream side. No diver had been located. The equipment had been removed by the county and logged as abandoned property. The notation did not include a description of the equipment beyond dive gear, older model. I thanked him and hung up. Donna was watching me. "Gary Solon," I said, "the 1989 diver. His company went out of business in 1993. Someone left dive equipment staged on the bank in 1992. I looked at the water. And there is an older model dive helmet and a coiled umbilical in a 6-foot void at the base of Pier 4's downstream shaft, stowed the way a diver stows equipment at the end of a job." Donna sat down on the equipment chest beside me. We both looked at the water for a while. "He went back," she said. "He went back," I said, "after the 1989 inspection. He found whatever I found or whatever preceded what I found, and he went back on his own, without authorization, without a tender, without anyone on the surface. And he didn't come up." I thought about the helmet, upright, positioned with deliberateness. The umbilical coiled carefully beside it. The care of it. The order. "He came up," I said. "Or he didn't, I don't know. What I know is that he went into the void and he left his equipment behind, and he is not in any record I can find." "If he didn't come up," Donna said, "where is he?" I looked at the water above Pier 4. I did not answer that question. I could not answer it with the precision my professional framework requires, which meant I could not answer it at all. Which meant I sat with it the way you sit with a measurement that doesn't resolve holding it, waiting, not forcing a conclusion that the evidence doesn't support. What I knew was this. The void at the base of Pier 4 had been built in 1931. It had been built for one person, body width 6 feet deep, smooth-walled. My name had been cut into the concrete beside its opening 92 years ago. The number below my name was the depth. Someone had come to that depth before me in 1992, and had either not come back or had come back, changed enough that they left the tools of their trade stowed in a formed space in a bridge pier and walked out of the record, and the bridge was scheduled for demolition in April. Whatever the void contained, the gear, the space, the specific body width absence of concrete that had been shaped in September of 1931, would be gone in 6 months. I sat on the equipment chest for a long time. The gorge was quiet around us. Pete had arrived while I was on the phone with Webb and was working the arch documentation on the far side of the bridge, out of sight. Donna sat beside me and did not hurry me and did not speak. I took the printed photograph from the inside pocket of my jacket the scan Webb had sent me of the 1931 construction photo, the wet concrete and the absent worker and the marks at the base of the downstream face. I looked at it for a moment. Then I tore it in half. Then I tore it again and again, until the pieces were small enough that I could hold them all in one hand. I held them over the water for a moment. Then I put them in my jacket pocket instead, because leaving them in the river felt wrong. Felt like giving them to something. And I had decided I was done giving things to the water below the Dunmore Bridge. At that point, there was one decision left that actually mattered. Not what the void was, not what had happened to Gary Solon. Not how my name got into 1931 concrete. The decision was whether I was going back down. I wasn't. I told Donna I was done with the contract. I said it quietly. The way I say things I have already decided, without the upward inflection that invites discussion. She looked at me. She did not argue. She has known me long enough to hear the difference between a position I am working through and a position I have reached, and this was the latter. "What's the reason?" she said. Not a question. A request for the language. "Structural concern at the Pier 4 base," I said. "The formed void represents an unknown in the original construction sequence. I'm not comfortable certifying the footing condition without understanding the void's extent and whether it affects the load path, I'm recommending a halt to the underwater assessment pending engineering review of the original construction documents. Donna listened to this. She turned it over. That's a legitimate concern, she said. It is, I said. It's also true. I found a formed void that isn't in the drawings. That is a real finding. The fact that it's not the only thing I found doesn't make it less real. She nodded slowly. Webb is going to push back. He's on a demolition timeline. Webb can push back, I said. The finding stands. A diver doesn't certify what he can't characterize, and I can't characterize a void I don't have drawings for. Donna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And you're not going back in?" "I'm not going back in." She looked at the water. She looked at it the way she had been looking at it all week, with the attention of someone who has been asked to watch something she cannot fully see. "Okay," she said. "I'll start breaking down the surface equipment." I said, "Leave the platform rigged until I've talked to Webb. I don't want it to look like we ran." She looked at me. "Did we?" I thought about the hollow at 58 feet, the helmet upright and deliberate, the umbilical coiled with the care of a person who expects to need it again, or who wants to leave things orderly for whoever comes next. The name in the concrete that had been waiting 92 years. The number that was a destination, not a date. "No," I said. "We made a professional determination based on field findings, and we're acting on it. That's what we're doing." Donna held my gaze for a moment. Then she nodded and went to the equipment station and began the methodical process of logging the morning dive and preparing the surface gear for the day's work, which she did because that is what Donna does. She maintains procedure even when everything around the procedure has changed shape. I called Webb. He answered on the first ring, which told me he had been waiting for an update since our earlier conversation. I gave him the formal language formed void, unknown extent, load path concern, halting the underwater assessment pending engineering review. I kept my voice the way I keep it when I am delivering a finding I am certain of, which is flat and specific and without apology. Webb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Cal, is this about the void or is this about the other thing?" I appreciated the question. Webb is a careful man, and careful men ask careful questions, and this one was as careful as any I had been asked all week. "It's about the void," I said. "The void is real and it's undocumented, and I can't certify the footing without understanding it." That's a true statement. "And the other thing," he said. "The other thing is in my dive footage and in your construction photograph, and I don't have an explanation for it, and neither do you." Webb was quiet for longer this time. I could hear the ambient sound of his office, the particular hum of a government building in the middle of a workday, the distant sound of other people's conversations, the click of a heating system. "The photograph," he said. "The one I sent you?" "Yes." "I've been looking at it since Monday," he said. "I've shown it to no one. I don't intend to include it in the project file." I said nothing. "The assessment report," Webb said carefully, "will note a formed void at the base of Pier 4's downstream shaft face, undocumented in the original construction record, requiring further engineering review before the demolition plan can be finalized. That is a legitimate finding that will require the demolition contractor to conduct a pre-demolition structural investigation. During that investigation, the void will be opened and documented." He paused. "Whatever is in it will be found at that point." "I understand," I said. "I want to ask you something," Webb said. "Okay?" "In your professional assessment, the bridge, the condition of it, you said in the Pier 1 and 2 reports that the concrete was in better condition than the records suggested. Is that consistent with everything else you found?" I looked at the arch above the platform, the pale concrete in the October light. The dedication plaque I couldn't see from this angle but knew was there. "Yes," I said. "It's consistent." Webb was quiet. "Okay," he said finally. "Halt the underwater assessment. I'll note the finding. The engineering review will be scheduled before demolition planning proceeds. "Thank you," I said. "Cal," he said, and then he stopped, and then he said, "Take care of yourself." It was the kind of thing people say without thinking, but he said it the way a person says something they mean precisely, which is differently. "I will," I said, and hung up. I spent the rest of the morning helping Donna run the formal closeout of the dive operation, logging the equipment hours, completing the dive records for the week, preparing the field documentation in the format Webb's office required. Pete worked the arch soffit on the far side of the bridge, unaware that the contract was effectively suspended, and I let him work because the arch documentation was legitimate work that needed doing, and because I needed the time at the table to do the paperwork correctly. At noon, I walked to the far side of the bridge and told Pete we were halting the underwater assessment on a finding and that I'd explain fully when we were off the site. He looked at me with the particular expression of someone who has registered all week that something was happening around the perimeter of his work and who has been patient about not asking. He said, "Okay." He began breaking down his arch documentation equipment. I went back to the platform table and sat with the field log and finished the entries. I was writing in the precise, abbreviated language of technical documentation, depth, duration, observations, findings, recommendations. And I was aware as I wrote it of how completely the language excluded everything that had actually happened at 58 feet. The language was accurate and the language was incomplete, and those two things can coexist in a technical record without contradiction, which is one of the things technical language is designed to allow. I wrote, "Formed void observed at base of downstream shaft face, southeast corner, Pier 4. Void dimensions, approximately 20 inches wide by 16 inches tall. Depth exceeds arm reach. Exact depth undetermined. Void walls smooth and uniform, consistent with formed void rather than void caused by aggregate migration or delamination. Void not indicated on original construction drawings or specifications. Presence of void represents unknown factor in original construction sequence with potential implications for footing load distribution. Recommend halt to underwater assessment pending engineering review of original construction record and evaluation of void extent and structural significance." I wrote, "Dive equipment observed within void interior. Equipment appears to be vintage commercial diving gear, approximately 30 years old based on style and condition. Equipment stowed in orderly manner inconsistent with accidental deposition. Origin of equipment unknown. Equipment not disturbed. Recommend documentation of equipment as part of engineering review." I wrote, "No other anomalies observed in Pier 4 assessment." I looked at that last line for a moment. Yeah. Then I left it. I did not write about the name. The name was in the dive footage, which I had downloaded to the project laptop per protocol. The footage was part of the project record. But the footage of the name was on a specific clip from the first dive, a clip that was 30 seconds of the downstream shaft base, and the project footage was logged by clip number and timestamp and description, and I described that clip as downstream shaft base, east section, general surface condition, which was accurate, which did not invite review of that specific 30 seconds. I am telling you this because I said earlier that I was going to be honest about my moral failures, and this was one of them. A smaller one than I am capable of, but a real one. I omitted the name from the record because including it would have required an explanation I could not provide and would have directed the engineering review toward the name rather than the void, and the void was the finding I wanted documented, the void with the equipment inside it. The void that was undocumented and unexplained and that the demolition contractor would have to open and examine before they could proceed. I wanted that on the record. The name I decided was mine. I don't know if that was the right call. I have thought about it since and I still don't know. The name was evidence of something. The name was evidence of a specificity that the void alone does not convey the specificity of a structure that had been built around a particular person, a particular future, a particular moment at 58 feet. Without the name, the void is an unexplained construction anomaly. With the name, the void is something else, something that the language of bridge assessment does not have a category for. and that Webb's engineering review will not be equipped to address. I left the name out of the record. I am telling you it now because the record and the testimony are different things, and I am committed to the testimony. Leaving the bridge should have ended it. It didn't. Because once we were away from the water, Donna asked the question neither of us had really said out loud yet. If that space was built for one person in 1931, and another diver reached it in 1992, why was my name outside it now? We were off the site by 2 in the afternoon. Pete drove back to Pittsburgh. Donna and I secured the support van and broke down the work platform and towed it to the equipment yard in Ohio Pile where we'd been staging it. The physical work of breaking down a dive operation is specific and demanding, and I was grateful for it. It gave my hands something to do, and my hands are always more honest than my head about what I need. Donna and I drove in convoy back toward Pittsburgh. We stopped for coffee at a diner in Connellsville, which is where I grew up, which meant I knew the diner and knew the coffee would be bad, and went there anyway, because familiar bad coffee is a specific comfort that I had earned. We sat across from each other in a booth by the window. The October afternoon light came through the glass at a low angle and made everything in the diner look more substantial than it was. Donna wrapped her hands around her mug and looked at me. "Talk me through it," she said. "From the beginning, the whole thing." So I did. I told her everything in the order it happened, including the things I had only half said on the platform and the things I had not said at all. The photograph with the marks in the wet concrete, the way the void walls were smooth and formed rather than natural, the helmet upright and the umbilical coiled. Gary Solon, who had dived the pier in 1989 and whose company had gone out of business in 1993 and who had apparently returned to the bridge in 1992 without authorization and without a tender, and had left his equipment stowed at 58 feet. I told her about the width of the void, that it was body width, my body width, in the suit and the rigging. Donna listened. She did not interrupt. She drank her bad coffee and listened with the attention she brings to everything complete and practical and without the performance of reaction. When I was done, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The void was built in 1931. Yes. But the equipment in it is from 1992. Approximately. So someone built a body-width space in the concrete in 1931, she said, and someone came and filled it partially in 1992, and now it's waiting again." "That's the sequence," I said. Donna looked at her coffee. "Gary Solon," she said. "Do you think he went in?" I thought about the orderly equipment, the helmet upright, the umbilical coiled with the care of a person who is done with a job. "I think he made a decision," I said. "I think he found the void and he went in it, and I don't know what happened after that. I don't know if he came back out. I don't know if coming back out was the right frame for whatever the void offered him." Donna looked at me. "What does that mean?" "It means I don't know if the void is a trap or a door," I said, "and I don't know which of those is worse." She was quiet for a moment. "And your name is outside it." "My name is outside it." "Cut into the concrete in 1931. "Yes." "Cal," she said, "what do you think it wanted from you?" I looked out the window. Connellsville in October, the old storefronts, the river visible at the end of the main street, the hills beyond it in their color. I had grown up here. My father had worked the mills here before they closed. I had learned to swim in the Eugenie 3 miles south of the Dunmore Bridge, in a flat water section where the current was mild and the bottom was sandy, and my father had stood on the bank and watched me with his arms folded the way he always stood, like a man who had made his peace with the river but was not going to pretend it didn't require watching. "I think it wanted me to go in," I said. "I think it has wanted someone specific to go in for a long time, and it built the space for one person, and it put the name there so the person would know it was meant for them. But you didn't go. No." "Why not?" I thought about Marin and the water cycle. I thought about the weight of the word careful and what she meant by it. I thought about my father on the riverbank with his arms folded, making his peace with the river without pretending it didn't require watching. Because a thing being built for you doesn't mean you owe it your presence, I said. Because something can know your name without that being an invitation you're required to accept. Donna looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Okay." Just that. Okay. The way she says it when she has evaluated something and found it sound. We drank our bad coffee. We drove back to Pittsburgh in convoy on the interstate, the sun setting ahead of us in the west and the hills of Fayette County going dark behind us in the rear view. And I thought about the Dunmore Bridge standing in the gorge in the October evening with the river moving past it and the hollow at its base, waiting in the dark below the waterline, with the equipment stowed neatly inside it and my name in the concrete outside it, and the number beneath my name that was a depth and a destination and an expectation that had been held in place for 92 years. I thought about the demolition scheduled for April. I thought about the engineers who would conduct the pre-demolition structural investigation that Webb's finding would require, who would send a diver to characterize the void, who would find the equipment and the smooth walls and the body width dimensions, and who would write a report about it in the language of structural engineering, which would be accurate and would be incomplete in the specific way that technical language is designed to allow. I thought about whether the void would still be waiting when the demolition contractors arrived, whether the thing that had been patient enough to put a name in wet concrete in 1931 would be patient enough to wait for the right person to characterize it, or whether it would accept whoever the investigation sent. I did not have an answer to that. I still don't. The part that finally changed how I understood the whole thing didn't come from an engineer, an old photograph, or another dive. It came from my 11-year-old daughter. I picked up Marin that Friday. She was at the door when I pulled up, which she always is. She has her mother's instinct for anticipating arrivals, which I have always found both moving and slightly unnerving. She came down the walk in her jacket with her overnight bag and got in the truck and said, "You look tired?" I said I'd had a long week. She looked at me with the particular assessment of an 11-year-old who has decided to take you seriously. "Was the bridge bad?" "The bridge was in good shape," I said. "Better than expected." "Then why do you look like that?" I pulled away from the curb and drove. The evening was clear, and the Pittsburgh sky above the highway was the specific deep blue of autumn evenings that I have always associated with driving home from somewhere that mattered. "I found something on the last dive," I said. "Something I didn't expect." She waited. She is good at waiting, which she gets from her mother. "A space," I said, "built into the base of the pier. That wasn't on any drawings." "Like a secret room?" "Yeah, like that." She thought about this. Was there anything in it? I thought about the helmet upright, the umbilical coiled, the orderly stowing of equipment by someone who had come to the pier alone and descended 60 feet without a tender and gone into a space that had been built for one person. "Some old equipment," I said, "from a previous dive." "Whose?" "Someone who worked the bridge before I did, a long time ago." Marin looked out the windshield. "Did they leave it there on purpose?" I thought about that for a moment. The deliberateness of it, the care. "I think so," I said. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Are you going to go back?" The question arrived simply, the way her questions always do, without preamble or cushioning. Just the thing she actually wants to know, placed in front of me with the confidence of someone who expects an honest answer. "No," I said. She looked at me. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She held my gaze for another moment, the way she does when she is evaluating whether the answer matches the person giving it. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied, and turned back to the windshield. "Okay," she said. "Can we get food? I want to tell you about my project." "The water cycle," I said. "It moved on. It's about rivers now, the way rivers remember where they've been." I looked at the road. I thought about the Yukiogani and the gorge and the bridge above it, and the dark water at 58 feet, and the space in the concrete that had been built to receive one person and that was still empty and still waiting, and that would be opened in the spring by people who did not know what they were opening. "That sounds like a good project," I said. "It is," she said. "Did you know that rivers have memory, like physically? The shape of where they used to go is still in the ground. They call it a ghost channel." I did not know that. I told her I didn't know that. "Ghost channel," she said again, with the satisfaction of someone sharing a phrase that has earned its keep. Even after the river moves, the old shape is still there underneath. You can see it from above. We drove. The city lights came up around us. Marin told me about ghost channels and the specific persistence of water and landscape, the way a river carries the record of everywhere it has been in the shape of the land it moves through. And I listened with the particular pleasure of a person whose work puts them in rivers and who had not, until this week, thought carefully about what rivers remember. I did not think about the Dunmore Bridge while she talked. I made a deliberate effort to be in the truck on the highway, listening to my daughter, and I was successful, which is something I am not always successful at, and which felt, that evening, like a meaningful achievement. We stopped for food. We drove home. She spread her project materials across the kitchen table and walked me through the topographic maps she'd printed. The highlighted sections where ghost channels were visible in aerial photography, the overlay she'd made showing the current river course against the historical one. It was careful work, methodical. She had her mother's precision and my habit of wanting to understand the thing before she talked about it, which is a combination that produces good project work and occasionally produces an 11-year-old who will not let an ambiguity stand. At some point during the evening, I went to the kitchen counter and took the torn pieces of the 1931 construction photograph from my jacket pocket. I had kept them there all week through the motel nights and the platform mornings and the drive back in the diner in Connellsville, and they were soft at the edges from the warmth of the pocket and slightly curved from sitting against my body. I put them in the trash. Not carefully, not ceremonially, just put them in the trash. The way you put a receipt in the trash when you no longer need the record of the transaction. Then I went back to the kitchen table and looked at Marin's map of ghost channels and thought about the specific persistence of absence, the way the shape of something that is no longer there remains in the landscape as a form readable from above, legible to someone who knows what they are looking at. The bridge would come down in the spring. The void would be found and documented. The equipment inside it would be removed and catalogued and traced, if it could be traced, which I thought it probably could. Dive equipment from that era was registered, and a missing diver from a registered company would have a paper trail that the right person could follow. Gary Solon, if that was whose equipment it was, would become a finding in an engineer's report. He would be given a record, however incomplete, which is a kind of accounting. The void itself would be measured and documented, and its origin speculated about in a structural report that would be accurate and incomplete, and my name would be documented. When the demolition contractor's divers surveyed the downstream shaft base, they would find the letters in the concrete. They would photograph them. They would include them in the report. My name would be in a state DOT engineering document about the Dunmore Bridge, alongside a description of a formed void and vintage dive equipment and the notation that the name's origin was unknown. I found I was comfortable with that. I found I was comfortable with my name being in the record as something unexplained, as a physical fact without a satisfying cause, as one of the things the bridge had held for 92 years that the demolition finally released. It seemed accurate. It seemed like the right kind of record for a thing that had been in the concrete since before I existed, an honest accounting of something that was real and unexplained, and that had not, in the end, gotten what it had been waiting for. I was the ghost channel, the shape that the river had moved around, still readable from above if you knew what you were looking at, but no longer the river's bed, no longer the course. Marin looked up from her maps and caught me looking at nothing and said, "What are you thinking about?" "Ghost channels," I said. She smiled. "Good," she said, and went back to her work. "So if you're waiting for me to tell you what was at the far end of that void, I can't. That's not me holding back the payoff. That is the payoff. The most important thing I did at the Dunmore Bridge was not discovering the name. It was deciding there are some answers you do not have to pay for with yourself. I want to be careful about how I end this, because I said I was committed to the testimony, and the testimony has to include what I know and what I don't know, and the difference between them. What I know. My name was in the concrete at the base of Pier 4 of the Dunmore Bridge, cut into the original 1931 pour, visible in a construction photograph taken the day the forms came off, readable by hand and by video light at 58 feet of depth. I did not put it there. No one who could have known my name put it there in 1931. The name had been there for 92 years before I arrived at the bridge. What I know below my name was the number 58, which was the depth of the footing, which was the depth at which I was working, which was a destination written into the concrete before I was born. What I know, there was a formed void at the base of the pier, body width, smooth-walled 6 feet deep, built into the original pour and not indicated on any drawing or specification. Someone had shaped that space during the original construction with deliberate intent and specific knowledge. What I know, a diver named Gary Solon conducted the last authorized inspection of Pier 4 in 1989. His equipment was found staged on the bank below the bridge in 1992. Inside the void at 58 feet, vintage dive equipment from approximately that era was stowed with the deliberateness of someone who had made a final decision about what came next. What I know? I went to the void and I did not go in. I surfaced. I suspended the contract on a legitimate finding. I drove home and I picked up my daughter and I listened to her talk about ghost channels and I put the torn photograph in the trash and I have not returned to the Dunmore Bridge. What I don't know, what the void is, what it offered Gary Solon. Whether he accepted the offer or refused it, or whether the distinction between acceptance and refusal means anything at that depth, in that darkness, with the bridge above and the river moving past and the space in the concrete exactly wide enough for one person. What I don't know, what would have happened if I had gone in? Whether I would have come back. Whether coming back is the right frame for whatever the void holds at its far end. What I don't know, whether the bridge, in its 92 years of waiting, was patient or urgent, or whether it experienced time the way structures experience time. Which is to say, not at all, because a bridge does not wait. A bridge simply is. The future it was built for exists inside it the way load exists inside concrete, not as intent but as fact, as a property of the material, as the consequence of how the thing was made. I don't know what made the Dunmore Bridge the way it was made. I don't know who shaped the void or how they knew to put my name beside it. I don't know what they understood about time and about specificity and about the particular patience required to build something that would not be needed for 92 years. I know this. My father used to say that concrete is honest. He said it working steel, which is a different material entirely. But he said it about concrete because he had worked both and he appreciated the difference. Steel, he said, will tell you a lie. It will look sound and it will carry load. And it will fail without warning when the corrosion you couldn't see has done its work. Concrete tells you what it is. It shows you its cracks and its voids and its deterioration as honestly as a person shows their age in the surface, in the texture, in the specific way it has changed under the weight of years. The Dunmore Bridge told me what it was. It showed me the name and the number and the void and the equipment stowed inside with the care of a final decision. It was honest in the way my father meant. I just had to decide what to do with the honesty. I decided not to go in. I have thought about that decision every day since. I have turned it over the way you turn over a measurement that surprised you, not with regret exactly, but with the attention due to a moment when your understanding of what is possible changed, and you changed with it, and you kept going. The demolition is scheduled for April. The assessment report, with Webb's added finding about the void, has been submitted to the DOT. The engineering review will be scheduled. Someone will dive the pier again. Someone will find the void and the equipment and the name in the concrete and they will do their professional best to characterize what they found, which will produce a record that is accurate and incomplete. I am not going to tell that person not to go to 58 feet. I am not going to tell them not to look at what is in the void or to read the name in the concrete or to wonder about the number beneath it. That is their job and their choice and their river. I am only going to tell you what I know, which I have done, and what I decided, which was to surface. The bridge is still there. The void is still there. The name is still there, cut into the concrete at the base of the downstream shaft in the original 1931 pour at 58 feet. It has been there for 92 years. It will be there until April, when the demolition contractors arrive with their equipment and their plans and their legitimate professional confidence in the explicability of physical structures. Whatever happens when they open the void, I won't know about it. I have made a specific, considered decision not to know about it. I have chosen the ghost channel over the river, the old shape still readable in the ground. The water moved on to somewhere else. My daughter is right that rivers remember. She is right that the shape of where a river used to be persists in the landscape long after the water is gone. But the water doesn't have to go back. That's the whole of it. That's what I know and what I decided and what I am willing to say. The rest belongs to the concrete and the dark water and the space at 58 feet that was built for one person and that I chose, deliberately, not to fill. I drove home, the city lights came up. Marin talked about rivers. I was careful.